Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today, we're on day 361 and we're covering Ganymed Spes 87 on the challenges of rapid population increase. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about that we need economic development, including foreign aid to poorer countries, but these should work so these countries develop the whole human and end up self-sufficient. Today, we're continuing chapter 5, the fostering of peace and the promotion of the community of nations. We're continuing section 2, setting up an international community. And the summary of today is that we shall ensure that all live as the population increases, but parents, not the state, still choose how many kids they have. Paragraph 7087 has 3 subparagraphs. A, we need to find a way to ensure good life for new people as populations grow. B, governments are key in managing population growth. C, state can't decide number of kids. This is one of the numbers where I think there is the most radical difference in 1965 versus 2025, so I want to give a little background here. So population increase as a percentage peaked in 1963, where the population of the world was growing at 2.2% annually. It's now about a third of that, and it's under 1%. And depending on which estimate you read, the estimated peak of world population is either in the 2050s or the 2080s in about 8.5 to 10.5 billion. We're currently at 8.5 billion. So we're kind of reaching the peak, and we're going to have to concern ourselves now with population decline. In more developed nations, this is already the case. You look at places like Japan, Korea, the U.S., if it wasn't for immigration, to an extent, a large part of Europe, even more so than the U.S. for the same reasons. We have populations that are drastically declining. We have birth rates at 1.5 per woman. You need about 2.1 per woman to sustain the population. And I think this is important to note because what they're talking about here, the exact idea, the exact principle is not really an issue today, but I think A and B provide a kind of background for what leaving the state, and what we can do to make sure people live, don't just kill them. And then C brings in the idea of managing births by the state, which is a really important factor, that it is the parents' decision, not the state's, and the state can't override the parents. So 87A is about needing to find a way to ensure a good life for all these new people. And we're going to read it in these first 2 paragraphs especially. I'm going to have a very brief commentary because it's not really that as applicable today, as noted. A, international cooperation is needed today, especially for those people who, besides facing so many other difficulties, likewise undergo pressures due to a rapid increase in population. There's an urgent need to explore, with the full and intense cooperation of all, and especially of the wealthier nations, ways whereby the human necessities of food and a suitable education can be furnished and shared with the entire human community. But some peoples could greatly improve upon the conditions of their life if they would change over from antiquated methods of farming to new technical methods, applying them with needed prudence according to their own circumstances. Their life would likewise be improved by the establishment of better social order and by a fairer system of distribution of land ownership. This is pretty straightforward, I think. The idea is that when we have an issue that's affecting poor nations more, the richer nations often have to help. And that's our duty, just like the richer person in town has to help the poor people in town, just on the wider scale of nations rather than individuals. And so, whether this issue is overpopulation or the population increase they thought at the 1960s, or today with other issues that are affecting poor nations, we have to be ready to help out. And the Vatican II fathers note that these new methods can also be helpful. They talk about new farming, better ways to distribute the land and things like that, which can really help to increase food supply. One of the concerns that was there in the time was that we'd run out of food. In fact, we produce more calories per person now than we did back in the 1950s as a world. And a lot of that is a lot of better food production and things like that with different mechanical things and with breeding seeds and things. So you get a higher percentage of the grain stalk as the seed or things like that we can eat. Like, we're not going to eat the wheat stalk as human beings. Cows and things can eat it because they have ruminant stomachs. We can't really eat that. Well, we can, but it's just not going to do anything. Anyways, that's a side note. Let's get on to paragraph 87B, talking about governments are key in managing population growth. B, governments undoubtedly have rights and duties within the limits of their proper competency regarding the population problem in their respective countries. For instance, in the line of social and family legislation, or regarding the migration of country dwellers to cities, or with respect to information concerning the condition and needs of the country. Since men today are giving thorough thought to this problem and are so greatly disturbed over it, it is desirable in addition that Catholic specialists, especially in the universities, skillfully pursue and develop studies and projects on all these matters. So here we note that governments have a key role in important issues like this in various countries. They obviously have a limited competency, is what they're saying, that governments can't overreach. We're going to talk about that in contraception or things like that in the next subparagraph, but that's the idea. Governments need to find a way to make sure that all the citizens born in their nation, all the citizens conceived in their nation, have a good chance of surviving. Obviously, you can't have 100% chance. It's just like life happens. But to make it so that they have a higher chance of being healthy, surviving, living to adulthood, living to old age. Moving on to 87C, it's basically just the state can't decide the number of kids and can't force contraception. Let's read it. C, but there are many today who maintain the increase in world population, or at least the population increase in some countries, must be radically curbed by every means necessary possible, and by any kind of intervention on the part of public authority. In view of this contention, the Council urges everyone to guard against solutions, whether publicly or privately supported, or at times even imposed, which are contrary to the moral law. For in keeping with man's inalienable right to marry and generate children, a decision concerning the number of children they will have depends on the right judgments of the parents, and it cannot in any way be left to the judgment of a public authority. But since the judgment of the parents presupposes a rightly formed conscience, it is of the utmost importance that the way be open for everyone to develop a correct and genuinely human responsibility which respects the divine law and takes into consideration the circumstances of the situation and the time. But sometimes this requires an improvement in educational and social conditions, and, above all, formation in religion, or at least a complete moral training. Men should discreetly be informed, furthermore, of scientific advances in exploring methods whereby spouses can be helped in regulating the number of their children, and whose safety has been well proven, and whose harmony with the moral order has been ascertained. I think this subparagraph has a very clear point. The state can't decide the number of kids. The state can't force contraception, things like that. This is a preparation for Humanae Vitae, which Paul VI would issue 3 years later. Paul VI, the Pope at the time, had held contraception for himself and said the issue of whether contraception is ethical in general would not be on the council, and he would write a document on it later. It's interesting that nonetheless, they have this one where they're critiquing one of the uses of contraception where it's kind of imposed or super promoted to the point it's almost imposed by the government. And that's an important aspect to think about. To think that, hey, contraception is unethical for the government to do, even if you aren't sure if it's ethical to do in general. I think that can be important because sometimes as Catholics, we have to collaborate with people who don't agree with us on everything. And I think there's quite a few who would disagree on government-forced contraception, but think people can choose contraception. So here it notes that couples can decide in conscience on the number of kids. It's their responsibility. It's their right to decide. This is the idea of subsidiarity, right? The lowest competent authority. And the government can't come in and say, oh, you have 4 kids, we're going to punish you. Now, it does indicate that you can, state and authorities can educate people and give small bonuses, I think, in ways to help people out. For example, in modern Western countries, you get a tax write-off for however many kids you have. And that's a bonus in the other way, right? And that's the state encouraging what it should do. Now, it's not punishing those who don't have kids, which I think is a very different thing than punishing those who have too many kids or don't have kids. Is the state can give bonuses, lower taxes or things like that. And that's important. So today that's important. And then the last point here is just about NFP, natural family planning, or fertility awareness. That these methods had been studied at the time, and in the last 60 years, even much more studied. There's even much more effective methods than there were in the 1960s. And using these methods, you can track women's cycles and know when she has a reasonable chance of getting pregnant. These methods can be used both to have a better chance of getting pregnant. If you have sexual relations as a couple, these days you're more likely to get pregnant, or to avoid it at the moment because you have enough kids at home and you're stressed or whatever else. And this is safe. This is in accord with the moral order and things like that. And so the church is positive about that. I think this number, you notice something that's quite different from what we have today, but it really is addressing the problem at the time of the 1960s. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can help StarQuest produce it. Another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we are going to continue with the next paragraphs of Gaudium et Spes. That's paragraphs 88 and 89 on Christians should help establish just international order. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, you can go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, and Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. There you'll find things like playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. Amen.